100 shirts for only $395. 20 shirts for only $100. Greenleaf Printing and Designs has stupendous signage, printed and embroidered apparel, and promotional products for you. They're at 5526 Burkhart Road in Dayton and on the web at greenleafprinting.com.
One of the concerns I have as a person who's in and about this community 7 days a week is this is the only part of town, quite frankly, I ride around in and see young people sitting on their hands on the curb. And I'm the kind of guy who stops and asks the police, everything all right? Because most of them, at least out here, recognize me. And I'm getting answers back like, yeah, the young man just forgot to use his turn signal when he made the left-hand turn back there. And so you got 5 young people sitting on the curb in 90+ degree temperatures because he forgot to use his turn signal. Now you're asking for permission to search his car. And when I ask the question why it's necessary to search his car, I'm getting this. Well, Reverend, it's got the strong smell of fabric refreshener. And I'm thinking, what's the legal limit on fabric refreshener? And this has been going on in this community for such a very, very long time. And this is why we know we have problems recruiting African Americans for the police department. But there's a second part of that question, because I brought this out, quite frankly, in a meeting that I've had both with the sheriff and with the chief. The extended powers that we're now seeing, for instance, Sinclair Community College, the police department has given, unfortunately, the city of Dayton police a bad rep. Because to the young people being pulled over, all they know is the police got me again. But oftentimes, it's Sinclair leaving their campus. I'm scared to go to the spaghetti warehouse because as you come back across 3rd Street, Saturday night at 11:30 at night, nobody been to Sinclair College. But here comes Sinclair police, always got a bunch of black folk on this side of the bridge. And ironically, after I left the meeting with the chief and the sheriff, where I talked about those issues, we were coming across the bridge and happened to look over to our right, and in front of the post office on William Street, there was a Sinclair police officer with an African-American woman pulled over and had her handcuffed standing in the middle of the street. These kinds of issues point to a tremendous gap between leadership that we elect, I think, and young people especially, but old people who are honest. Some of us as old folk ain't honest. Right. We're not honest. We blame the young folk for everything. When the truth of the matter is, it's not all their fault.
Exactly.
We have been poor examples. The fact that we have not advocated for them.
That's very true.
How do we fix what is clearly broken with our police department? And where in the world are these extended powers that say now that even Grandview Hospital Police can pull you over and write you a ticket in the middle of 3rd Street when Grandview don't have no property out there? And how do we go about fixing it?
Oftentimes there's a lack of respect for another person's culture. We know in America, oftentimes the only culture that's respected is Western Anglo-Saxon culture. And I don't think you could, be sensitive to a person's culture. You first respect the person's culture. Yeah. And I think that's part of the reason why instead of having those,
I want to give a chance to respond too. I certainly want to give an opportunity to respond.
Yeah, I guess I have a couple comments and actually a question. First, I think diversity in the police force is absolutely required. That's something we have to do. I don't know that I know the exact answer on how to do that, but I think clearly it's needed. The other thing I think that would possibly help is if we could get the police out of their cars a little bit, walk the streets a little bit more, because then they know the people a little bit that they're policing, as opposed to just always kind of doing drive-bys and not having any idea. I will say, actually, 2 other comments. I did get stopped by the UD police once for not having the tail light, and it's like, I was on Brown Street, and I was like, who are you, and why are you stopping me? So I was shocked. And I can't imagine the problems, that Sinclair has caused. I didn't even know they did that. But the other, we in South Park are a little bit blessed because the Miami Valley has spent some money to allow community-based policing. And so I've seen that up close and personal, where we see those police, we know who's in our community, and it makes a world of difference. Yeah. And I know that times are tough and we have fewer police, but I would rather have one guy that at least is assigned to some place, and he walks around and people actually know who he is, than the way we have it right now. And I've asked this question many times, and I've never really gotten a good answer as why we can't go back to something more like community-based policing, where we assign specific people to specific neighborhoods, and that's who you know to call. And I think knowledge, if you know somebody, that's where you get the understanding, but it's when they're just driving through and they don't see anything. Now, I have one question for you folks, and that is, one thing the Reverend said was, you know, they stopped because their car smelled. And it seems to me we have a lot of people in prison for drugs. And I guess my question for you is that something that should be illegal? Should there be a minimum amount? I'm not encouraging drug use, but it seems like it's the road to getting a lot of people in prison. It's a lot of reasons for a lot of our police stops.
Good question. Mr. Jones, did you have a comment or question?
I'm sorry, Reverend McCoy. I'm the chairman of the Priority Board, and I want you to know that we strongly support the Grandview Police Department and their enforcement endeavors because, come on, y'all, when are we going to take the onus for our responsibility? We don't want to sell us drugs.
Right.
Come on, man.
No.
I'm not saying, wait a minute, I'm not saying that we are the end of the chain. I was in drug enforcement for 6 years in the United States Coast Guard. Believe me, the people at the top of the chain, they do not look like me. But the reality is, I want the police to take the drugs out of my neighborhood, almost by whatever means necessary. I don't want anybody's rights disrespected. I've been sprayed, I've been maced, I've been beat down, and I'm still here. I'm not saying that we shouldn't hold somebody accountable, but let's don't disencourage law enforcement to justify our negative behavior, because it ain't them shooting us, it's us shooting us. It's us selling poison to us. So let's don't make that a white man issue. Let's don't make that a police department issue. What are we going to do to hold ourselves accountable?
Some of us are already doing that work, Mr. Jones.
I get that, but I mean, the way you said that about the police department at Grandview Hospital, they couldn't afford to do for us what Good Sam did for us at the other end. Good Sam gave us community policing, and it's working
with all due
beautifully.
respect and looking at the time, I'm going to stand on exactly what I
Have a good evening,
said.
y'all. Let's just be real about it.
I don't have any problem. I don't have any problem with being pulled over by Dayton police when I'm in the city of Dayton. But I do have a problem with being pulled over by Sinclair Police, Good Sam Police, or any other police department. I don't care about being pulled over by Montgomery County or even Oakwood Police. But I do have.
What you think about the debate tonight, or the discussion?
Well, I thought the discussion and the introduction of the commissioners and the commission candidates was very informative. I was actually very impressed with Mr. Manovich. I think he'll be a great candidate for city commissioner with his business background, with all of his community activism on the east end of Dayton. I liked a lot of what he said. I just think Dayton needs new leadership.
Manovich brought up a subject that no one in Dayton politics, I think, has ever touched at a political level. Lots of activists have talked about it, and it's quite a subject all across the country, and that was, should we be he kind of asked, should we be involved in the drug war? And then the kind of discussion kind of disintegrated between...
Nobody answered it except for me.
What do you think? What do you think about that?
I absolutely thought that was great, and that's why I said, wow, you know, this is somebody that definitely needs to be on the commission. If he's that forward thinking, you know, we need somebody like that, a progressive thinking person. Absolutely. We need somebody like that. If he could even say something like that and propose something like that, I want somebody like that on the commission.
Well, he just asked
He just asked a question.
Don't have no warrants.
You guys thinking nobody said anything.
Yeah, well, it seemed there was like some kind of stuff. What did you think about Mr. Manovich's question? I thought it was he kind of crossed something that no other, at least local Dayton politicians done. He asked the crowd what they thought, really kind of essentially what they thought about the war on drugs, and then there seemed to be a personal.
Well, yeah, you know, a lot of people feel that the war on drugs is a war on poverty. I understand what he's saying because, you know, when we look at it, you know, cigarettes are legal, you know, alcohol is legal, you know, and it's all because these things generate revenue for the government. However, you know, studies have shown that, you know, the government has aided in bringing cocaine and other narcotics. You know, I know because I was in the United States Navy into America. You see what I'm saying? So I think people view it from that perspective that, you know, don't make some
Sure.
with the mandatory sentencing with crack and cocaine.
Well, I guess when we look back to the 1930s, you know, obviously during alcohol prohibition, it was a total bloodbath, like we're seeing now with drug prohibition. Do you think changing the market conditions over who controls, you're really just talking about who controls vice? Is it going to be regulated, or is it going to be people trying to make ends meet, selling rocks?
I think it'd be like the same way. Like, you know, when they was like, you know, when we had the dry time in the 20s, you still have people getting rich out of selling liquor. So I think...
Would they be shooting each other over the drug trade if it was legalized and regulated, much like it is in like state liquor stores?
You could buy it at a store, no they wouldn't. No they wouldn't. You don't see people.
From an economic standpoint, he was the first commissioner that I've ever heard even ask the question. I mean, it's a question that people talk about in national circles all the time. People talk, I mean, and lots of people have strong opinions, like, you know, this shouldn't go on, you know, look what happened in the 30s, you know, with alcohol prohibition, it's the same thing. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I think you made a very interesting point, because as you say, you know, this so-called war on drugs is really costing the American people more than it is stopping the traffic of drugs. So I think that I think he made an interesting point, like alcohol is legal right now, that if you legalize certain drugs, I wouldn't legalize all of them across the board, but I think that if you legalize certain drugs and then put that money then in educational programs and not preventative programs, but educational programs and then rehabilitation programs.
That's what they've done in Portugal and Amsterdam.
That only makes sense, you know, because this war on drugs is it's causing communities to suffer. It's filling up the prisons with non-violent offenders. It's causing then the non-violent offenders to not be employable, which then affects the economy. I mean,
it's a whole snowball.
Why they haven't thought of a different solution to this problem is something to be examined within itself.
Do you think that's one of the main causes between a lot of the tension between police and minority communities today?
I think that the tension between the police and the black community is really caused by corporate greed.
Okay.
Because see, now corporations are now invested in the prison industrial complex, so then it benefits them to keep this so-called war on drugs going, because it fills the prison cells, which then help their bottom line. So you know, this whole war on drugs is really a war on decency. You know, it's a war on the American people. It's a war on the American way of life, because then the corporations. Because a lot of people think that jobs are sent overseas. What they don't know is the jobs are still here, but they're behind prison bars. So, you know, I think that this whole war on drugs is something that should really be examined, and corporations should be looked at closely for this, because somehow this large influx of drugs is coming into the community and it's not being stopped.
And prior to the 1900s, it really was unregulated. I mean, it just wasn't and people knew drugs have been around for thousands of years, and they'll be around for long after we're gone.
But then when you just examine history, when you look at Prohibition, you look at a time where there was a lot of murder. There was, you know,
mayhem.
I mean, what you had during Prohibition is what you have now. Then when they legalized it and gave the responsibility to people, and then also educated them on the effects of alcohol, the effects of smoking cigarettes. Now you see the people with their own intelligence saying that, no, I don't want to use this.
What is your solution on the unemployment in our community?
We want to talk about that. We're going to start in the middle with Mr. Manovich this time.
I was thinking, but okay. There's a couple different solutions. Obviously, the first one starts at education, and it starts at education at a very early age. We can't let children get to kindergarten or first grade and be behind. Everything we've seen indicates that. And again, I'm speaking from my experience of working with East End.
I'd say that you have to tackle it in looking at two things. First, you have to look at short term. How do you make sure there's food on the table of people now? And we've done that. Mr. Manovich mentioned the deconstruction program, which the city started with a grant to East End. That's putting folks to work, learning a trade. And just like if you can take apart a house, you can put one together. And that's a very valuable trade to have. We're looking at job retraining programs. I just got word today that there was a congressional earmark designed to take unemployed UAW workers and train them on how to analyze intelligence at the base. And I love that. I love that. There are some bright folks out there who are not working just because they haven't had the right chance, or they haven't had the right chance to retrain themselves and remake themselves. So there's going to be $1 million now aimed at taking these guys who've been out of work for a couple of years now and training them on the job that there's huge demand for. Trying to figure out how to use all the data coming from the satellites and coming from about our overseas enemies and what's going on there. Train them how to analyze that. So that's another thing that's going on right now that's very good. And the third is we need to, right now, encourage people to open businesses. And whether that's with helping them out with a little bit of money, helping them out with advice, hooking them up with a mentor to help them to figure out how to open a business, that's the kind of thing that's going to start and sort of snowball. Once you hire one guy and you get more customers, hire another and another and another, and that helps everybody. But that said, in the long term, Mr. Manovich really hit it right on the head. We have to worry about education. We have to make sure that our folks are prepared for the kind of jobs that are going to make up the Dayton that we want to become. A Dayton that has a lot of well-paid jobs, a Dayton that has residents to take care of their houses, and enough people around, like Mr. Manovich says, to have dry cleaners and grocery stores. So education really is very important. Absolutely. Thank you.
We need to build on the economic assets we currently have. Like our business strips, like our two inner city shopping centers. I've been talking about East Town and West Town. Both are assets. East Dayton as well as the West Dayton, as well as these business strips. East 3rd Street, West 3rd Street, Xenia Avenue, Germantown. A number of brownfield sites. One over here, obviously across down here on 3rd and Abbey. Inland, and DMAX. And so we have these facilities that once were used for General Motors employees that are currently vacant, that need to be reused. So you never know where those ideas come from, but nobody has the facilities to be well, at least retrofitted for an employment opportunity. So those are bidding on the assets we already have. So it'll work.
We need to find, in some countries, microfinancing. Microfinancing. People sending in bits of money. I call it, let's call it buying into Dayton. Buy into Dayton. I'm going to send $250. I'm going to send whatever. And then this money would be managed by a neutral source. And then people who would need a loan, $1,000, whatever, could borrow this money. The people giving it would get a return on their investment. The people borrowing the money would pay interest on it. But that would be an opportunity for people to get into business that don't qualify for conventional financing. Not many banks want to lend to small businesses because of the small dollar amount that's needed.
Since RTA service to the Beaver Creek area, the Green, the Fairfield Commons, is not wanted, how can the city of Dayton help locals who want jobs in the Beaver Creek area?
This is putting pressure on the public officials out there, as well as the pressure on federal government to make sure that there's no violation of some transportation laws for them not allowing for bus stops to be installed out there close to the Green or to the Fairfield Commons Mall. I'm not a mall person, so I may be.
Fairfield.
I'm Fairfield then. Okay, Fairfield. So, City of Dayton, I think we have to play a supportive role of an activist group that's doing the right thing.
I'm worthy to run for city commission.
I have a strong background in volunteerism. I have March of Dimes, the Red Cross. What my biggest work has, that I'm really proud about. I have gone to over 700 meetings.
I have rehabbed over 8 houses in my neighborhood. Some I've sold, just fixed up and sold. Some that were doubles were always going to be rental properties. We tried to hold on to because we wanted to improve the people who were renting them. Because the people who were in there before weren't the best residents to have. They were the ones who were causing problems. Everybody knows in the neighborhood, those are a couple problem houses where, you know, that's where all the problems seem to occur or originate. So over 20 years, I've been spending my time more helping particularly my neighborhood and the neighborhoods around me. Like I said, I've been on the board of Rebuilding Together, which is a citywide organization. Does everybody know about Rebuilding Together? If you don't, please, good. I mean, if everybody doesn't know about it, you should, because we're always looking, or they're always looking for nominees, and half the time, you know, when I was on the board, we were always knocking on doors trying to find them. And it's one of the best organizations around. I'm disappointed more people don't know about it, because it's not only in April, but they have a year-round program now. So if you own your home and you're a senior citizen, or you're low income, or you're disabled, they will come and they will help you fix something in your house that needs it. They will put in a ramp, they will redo the kitchen.
They're taking applications now.
They're taking applications now. I said, I've been on East End for 12 years, and we're all about, you know, community housing and trying to fix up the Twin Towers neighborhood and the whole East Side. We've been instrumental in forming a charter school, which we actually then gave back to the city of Dayton, which when they rebuilt Ruskin. So we're one of the few organizations started a charter school, got it folded back into the city of Dayton, and actually came with like $400,000 of money we had left to give back to the city schools. So I feel like I've been very active the last 20 years, though it's been not on a very public level. And I view this opportunity as continuing the ability to try to help Dayton move along. Thank you.
People know me as being, what's the word?
Are you talking directly to me?
I'm talking to Mr. Johnson, Mr. Walker. People know me as what?
Being persistent.
Yeah, relentless.
That's right.
Relentless. So we want that store on the west side.
I think in some ways we have a unique opportunity right now, because there's so many houses that have been, you know, are abandoned and vacant, foreclosed on, that the banks have. I think the city of Dayton should take every opportunity to try to acquire those and see what they can do about either using them for inducements for police, you know, younger police officers saying, here's a program where, you know, we have a house that if you stay on the force X amount of years, it's yours for free. That way we not only keep the police living in our community now that they've been scattered, but we could use it for both firemen and other city employees. So I'd like us to take this opportunity when we have this housing stock sitting there to try to, if it's just there, I don't want to talk about kicking people out of their homes, but if they're vacant and abandoned, which I know we have our share on the east side, I'm sure everybody has them here too.
Amen.
You know, a lot of those are owned by banks now that don't want them. I mean, the banks don't really want to own those. They're looking to dump them. They're looking to get rid of them for whatever they can, and I think the city should try to be aggressive about building and acquiring those. I know at the county level they've talked a little bit about a land bank, but I think we should try to be imaginative of what we can do with those. And if you think about it, let's say you have a young 20-something who's just his first year as a police officer or a fireman or a city employee. If you can go to them and say, here, we have a house, and all you have to do is live there for X amount of years, and it's yours, that will also save us some salary. So I think that's something we have to look into, try to reuse those houses, and again, bring more people back into the city of Dayton.
Is it that we have not made moves to make Martin Luther King Jr. Street official, as opposed to simply honorary like we've done some other streets?
I don't know what the reason is why we haven't done it, but if we want it done, we can work on it.
There are several cities in the country who have passed an ordinance for the banks to take responsibility for their financial burdens. They have created, the burdens that they have created that make it mandatory for banks to mediate with homeowners before they foreclose, and also that when they get ready to foreclose, they have to file for foreclosure that will require them to pay a $20,000 cash bond that then goes to the city that they use to draw down monies when they have to upkeep those properties.
Or demolish, that's a great idea.
And I'm asking, my question is, because the ordinance is out there, what do you think of the ordinance, ordinance such as this, and do you think it will work for Dayton?
I think there's some good stuff there. I'd be interested in hearing what cities those are. I'd like to take a look at the legislation if I could. If that was your question, I'd be interested in hearing more
I
about
will
it.
get you the ordinance. We have a sample ordinance ready to go. I will get it for you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I think that's an excellent idea, and I think we need to add on to it too, because some people have been intimidated out of their homes, been forced out of their homes without being legally evicted. In other words, the banks have filed papers, but they never follow through to the end of the foreclosure. So what happens? We get people, they abandon the house, they think that they're done, And then later on down the line, they find out that, oh, I'm still the owner of it. Well, I've moved out, you know. And so I think that we need to hold the banks accountable.
What type of opportunities will you provide for youth?
What opportunities will you develop for youth?
I'll take that one. As an incumbent, I feel it's my responsibility to lead. You know, it's tough right now. I saw there was something on CNN a couple days ago that said that this is the lowest percentage of youth that are employed since they started keeping records of how many youth were employed. And that's not good. You know, that's really bad. And it's a symptom of the terrible financial situation we're in. It's a symptom of the financial crash that happened a couple years ago, so older folks are having to work longer than they would have otherwise, and they're not freeing up jobs that would have been freed up before that. The best solution that we've been able to come up with in the city is to push our folks to offer more internships. Some are paid, some are unpaid, but even the ones that aren't paid, at least you get the experience and exposure of real world work. You get to know the processes and those sorts of things at the city, and you get a foot in the door. I mentioned before, I started in this profession as an intern. 2 or 3 of our staff now in the commission office started as unpaid interns. So, you know, I feel like we're minding our own house and taking care of the knitting, as they say, and we're trying to give as many youth internship possibilities as possible.
I go to my wife, she's working up in Troy, and she would love to have an unpaid intern. So the key is making the connection between the businesses and some organization that is keeping track of these. That's where the real disconnect happens, because the organization, you know, sometimes it's easy. For example, my company, you know, went to Wright State and said, you know, we need an intern who can do this, and they found somebody who's, you know, in a business major who can do it. But if you don't have that connection, if you don't have somebody who's kind of collating the kids or who's available, you can't match it up. So to me, it's a question of mismatching right now, where we have, you know, most companies would be happy to take an intern for a period of time, show them the ropes. You know, they learn something about being in a working world. And it's just a matter of trying to link them up with the right organization that has the kids who can do that. So I think that's the issue, but I think it's clearly the best way.
We have a Department of Youth Services, so we in fact are spending money annually to how to deal with our young folk in terms of, we have, again, some assets that are targeted toward young folks called our recreation centers and parks. If folks aren't using them, well then, they need to find a way to use these assets. We, unfortunately, because of the budget issue, we're going to close down the youth center out on East 5th Street. That's unfortunate, but know that we hired a young man for about 3 years to think aloud about how we can work with our young folk. He certainly came up with this idea about a clearinghouse for all the youth providers in Dayton, Montgomery County. So we have that information, but it's about certainly engaging young adults in their own futures. So I would just continue to do what we in fact are doing, and if we get money, do more.
It's a great thing to advocate for right now, because youth employment dollars and the kind of money that Commissioner Lovelace is talking about are getting cut at both the state and federal level. So if you're in a situation like this with state or federal representatives, talk to them, because that's the kind of money that's being cut.
I would like to encourage companies to work programs, apprenticeships, that would embrace and welcome young people in the community, to identify people in the community that could fit into their companies and who can be a benefit to their company, as well as provide training to those individuals.